Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here. The introduction is already done. I first will confront you very short with my work as it looks like. If you go somewhere in an exhibition, you find my work there, it looks like that. That's the way how I'm presenting it. What I'm actually doing, I will start to explain now. I work a lot with architecture constructions, and for me it's not so important to design an object as an object. For me it's also really important to show aspects of the production, but also of the breaking down of something. So, and all this happened in this project which I showed you now. It was an exhibition in Heerlen. And in this gallery place, I built up this building there. So I produced this building there. And I also destroyed the buildings again during the exhibition. So the totally breakdown of these buildings happened during the exhibition till they were totally gone again. And there was this rubbish piles. These buildings were done with clay, and then if you don't fire clay, you spray water on it, you can destroy it again. So I used quite a lot of water. Of course, it was a very bloody, muddy hell there. And when that was lying there for 2 weeks, it was interesting for me to look at it still, because some molds started to grow, so some life rises up. And then I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I did experiments with this clay mud. I put seeds on it. So I really grow plants. So finally, these former buildings transform to landscape. Why this is so interesting for us? Because what happened here is that you can see if something disappears, not always something disappears, always appears something. You don't have only disappearing, there's always something is gone, something is coming. So this kind of circle is interesting for me. And that idea is also behind this installation, which is also an architecture installation. Because when you look at it, and I did that on purpose, you can't see the difference if these buildings are now in the state of being under construction or in the state of demolishing. It's actually the same aesthetic. There's no difference. And that I wanted to express with these sculptures. I think if you see this, you easily can understand that they have a huge fascination for buildings when they're broken down. Why it's so interesting for us to look to buildings when they are demolished. Because during the demolishing, the real construction becomes visible. So we can learn a lot of building at that moment, because we can see how the building is built. We see the strong parts and everything. We can understand the building. When the building is ready, we can't, because there's a lot of hiding facade here as well. When they start to remove it, we learn about the building. So I really think a lot in these ideas. If we take something away, we also give something. I think we can transform this also to the whole idea of city planning, because when we add something to the city, we always remove something. It's not only one way, it's both, actually. But you can also think of this kind of circle idea also with the design itself. When you are a designer or an architect or a builder, even your way of constructing can be also destructive, which we can see here at this project. What I did here, I was in residency in the Ceramic Center in Den Bosch, and I had the idea to reenact the whole building process of Soviet architecture. Because Soviet architecture for me is very interesting, because Soviet architecture, in my opinion, was the biggest utopian top-down project we had ever in the world. So because the dream of these socialist people was to automate everything, so they automated the whole life surrounding of people, so they had a fully industrialized city development, and they placed these cities all over their territory fully in industrial prefabrication method. And that I did there at the Quranic Center as well. I employed students, and I gave to every student a very simple job. You are just rolling out slabs, you are cutting squares, you are putting glue on this, and you just add the plates on the construction. So in this collective of people, everyone was just only executing this, his own simple job. And when you had break, you went to break, and for the rest, they did nothing to know about the whole construction, or the idea behind. So they were just executing, and that leads to this kind of constructions. You can see quite a lot of failure scenarios there, of course, because the coordination between the people does not work so well. Yeah, this typical lacks of quality you have also everywhere. When you look to industrial things, you see the trails of glue, welding, machine. If you look very careful to all of these industrial things, we find these tracks everywhere, on plastic, on metal. You find there's this kind of wrong things caused by automated industrial production. But sometimes, of course, because the skills of these workers were so bad, also bigger failure happens, because of course the buildings were not so glued so well. So some of the buildings really collapsed in the oven then. For me, this was a very interesting step to learn something about ceramic, but also observing processes, and become so surprised by myself about the result of that process. So that I decided I want to really go on with that, not designing a building as a building, but really set up these kind of production processes myself. And because I did it then for the next years myself, I could develop my skills, and that enables me to build these same kind of buildings much higher, but also thinner. What is interesting with this construction, this building is a bit like that. Here the clay is very, very thin, and it's also made by fast-produced prefabricated elements piled on each other. But because the clay is so thin, and what happens to clay when it's thin, it dries very fast. And when clay dries, it becomes a bit wavy, like paper. When we put water on it, you get also these waves in, and it shrinks. So these two things are the reason for this deformation which we have in the construction, because it was drying and shrinking during construction. But what happens when it's something dry, like paper or something, when it's wet, it starts to bend. And what's the effect of this bending? You can see when the paper is flat, it's like this, and when we bend it, it becomes stable. And that's the interesting thing of that construction, because the weakness actually of the material is a stabilizing factor. So I'm building on the weakness on the material. Only by accepting this weak thing, I can build so high. Without this, it would not be possible with that little amount of clay to build that high construction. Because if I would try to build straight, this construction will break. With the same principle, I made this sculpture. So this sculpture is really leaning on its own collapse. We can understand that a bit better if we look to photos I made during the building up of this sculpture. This sculpture is also made by only one component which is connected to each other, they are like this, a bit like a chain, so that they're very stable. So when I started building them up, they collapsed from their own weight because they were soft. You see, first was higher and sink down, but I went on, was building. And what's interesting, when things are collapsing, when they're falling, they fall to automatically to a stable position. So if you leave them there, they can be also supportive to the construction. So this construction is really leaning on its own collapse. Here we also can see it very nice. So also the title of the sculpture is actually Building While Collapsing. And here you can see very nice how it collapsed, but how it finds itself a stable position. It's just a pile. With the same principle, I built up this sculpture, which was a temporary sculpture from wood on the square. The title of it was Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. And yeah, it was of course my idea to show a broken carousel, a kind of game over idea. But on behalf of that, this broken part of the construction was also a practical thing, to be able to place that sculpture there on open space on only one day without any external support. Because what I did, I started with the broken part first, and with the broken thing I had a kind of self-standing up structure, so I didn't need any extra support. So they build up so it grows automatically to that big sculpture. So here also I used the failure as a help to speed up my construction. So you see, for me indeed, what I said, I guess I said it already, that for me decrease and increasing is the same, or you remove a place, it is a kind of circle thing. I don't see the border in between. I take both on the same value level. Where we can see this also very nice are ships, because if you look to ships, for example, these two images, we can't see immediately which one is the ship which is now on the breaking down and which photo is taken on a shipyard. It's not really clear. So it's a bit the same. So we find this phenomenon there as well. That's of course the reason why I'm very interested in shipbuilding as well, because also it's a lot of industrial automating processes in it. So I'm building also with ceramics several sculptures which are copying items which we find on ships. Like here also ship components made from porcelain. Porcelain is also a very interesting material because it even shrinks more than clay. So we get this deformation there. Lots of the plates become like this. And that's also something which we always see in ships, because in ships we can, if we look very careful to them, we can see we never have really straight lines on a flat surface, because the steel is also somehow a soft material. We always have deformation in these plates. If you look to these super shiny cruise ships on a certain angle of shadow, it's really like this. So, and this effect here rises up with the clay. And the same as you've seen before, I do also with ships, a sculpture where the building up is the same than the breaking down. It's not really clear, even to me. It's not important. It's the same aesthetic. But it also can be complete ships sometimes. But you see also here the ship is broken, and that is also done half on purpose, because what I did here was using different types of clay. So I'm not working with glazes and things, so no artificial colors, but you have, some maybe might know that, but you have a lot of different kind of clays, like these brick stones. They have different colors, so it's slightly different material, but every different type of clay has a different shrinkage. So when you use them together, they can't work together. What happens when it dries and goes to the oven? It has to break somehow because they can't work together because the shrinkage is different. So on purpose I left this ship breaking in the oven. Here you can see another detail of these ships, and you can see these dots on it, and they are also done on a kind of purpose or surprise. I don't really know what happened, because the temperature, for example, in the oven was slightly too hot, that you get this kind of melting process. So I'm really playing also with these accidents which could happen with ceramics. So a lot of ceramists are really busy to provide this, because it's are really accidents, but are really playing with these accidents which could happen. So far about my work, but I want to finish this presentation also with some general photos which show something about my inspiration, where my ideas are coming from. And for me this is a very crucial photo. This is just a wall from a building, how it would look like if we don't maintain it. So if we don't maintain Stieglitz Museum or this Vrije University anymore, after a few years the facade looks like this. And that's so interesting for me, because what we see here is the same thing again. So it could be color paint which peels off, but it's also plants who are growing. So they're going away and coming thing is actually the same aesthetic. So that's for me very interesting if you see this picture. And of course a very big subject for me is the whole shipping thing. The idea that we're living here in this welfare, and all these goods, 90% of it have been in the container before and shipped all over the world. So we are really addicted to these ships. And part of the whole ship industry is, and a very crucial part, that they all have to be demolished. And that happens in India, and it has to be done very efficient, because these ships we're going there are still functioning. They only go there because we have bigger and faster ships, and they are not efficient enough anymore, and just to earn as much as money, they have to be demolished as cheap as possible. So these ship-breaking beaches are really, really huge. So it's a really big environmental problem, you see. And hopefully you understand this image. There is ships just put on the beach there, and enormous beaches. And the people there are working really with their bare hands. It's the most disgusting circumstances for having a job there. Officials say it's the most dangerous job in the world. A lot of accidents happen, etc. So it's a really, really disgusting thing, but it's really part of our welfare here, because the whole thing which are functioning, we can finance that because we put them to recycle, they are earning the money back. And then there's also a lot of stuff, and a lot of poison, and the people are living in this rubbish. And then it's also a lot of the useful things are going to market again. So if you buy nice second-hand chairs, for example, they could come from India, from this huge market, because in these canteens of this ship, or a cruise ship, for example, has thousands of nice 70s, 60s chairs, and they go on market again, of course. And so that's, I think, why it's also so good subject for me to play with this ship on behalf of the aesthetic as well, which is also for sculptures very nice as a visual artist. It's another interesting part of it, of course. And another subject where I'm very busy with, that's now my own photos, because that is the architecture of the former Soviet Union. What I said, it's the biggest utopian movement we ever had, in my point of view, because 25 90% of the people in the world still living in this kind of buildings. And why it's so interesting to look at it architecture. Because this architecture is obviously full with a lot of failure. As I mentioned already earlier in this presentation, people just executing. So there's a kind of anonymous processes, and the question is, does it always really make sense? But the interesting thing is that all these countries, because this kind of failure we have here in the Netherlands as well, but we don't see it because we are rich enough to remove it permanently. So if something is going wrong, like the Balmer, okay, money comes, it's gone, and then new buildings are coming. So we are not able to see this failure. But in that countries we can, because the people still live on it. So they don't have the money to change it so fast. And that's the reason why I think we can learn a lot by observing this kind of neighborhoods. And I could fill now 2 hours with it, but I just show you very few spots I found. So they live in this kind of rough architecture, but of course they also make them nice. And how they do it, for example, with these leftovers from industrial process. These are these metal strips where machines stamp something out. You can make fences. So it's very simple industrial rough stuff, but they find their ways to create also attractive life circumstances there. Or if they have some money, they do crazy attachments to their houses. You find a lot of these informal structures in the yards of their buildings, like these kiosks or whatever, meeting places. Not everything has to be positive, because it's also a thing that private property is much more occupying former public space. Now this is a yard, maybe children played there before, now you use this place to protect your private property by just building your own garage blocks there. But you still have also nice new attachments which are still for collective use, like this, and so on and so on. And for me also, but it's a personal question, everyone has to judge himself. Do we really make buildings better when we are renovating them? That's, I think, an interesting question. I'm not so sure, indeed. And I want to finalize my presentation with this image, because this is really my favorite image, because it shows a building which is actually, in my point of view, in a good state. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not painted fresh, but it's not really necessary. We don't see really something which is dirty. It's a solid building, okay, and it has a very nice dynamic with nature, and I think you could live comfortable in it. Why not? And thank you for your attention.